As your trusted advisors, this forum enables us to invite experts in different fields to engage with our stakeholders on topical issues that affect our day-to-day interactions. This year, we have chosen cyber risks as our topical issue due to the new dynamics on how we live and how we work, and the new exposures that this has introduced to us. Please join us on 13th October 2021 as we delve into this discussion to help secure our tomorrow.
Good morning, good afternoon, good whatever time it is, wherever you are. Welcome to the Minet Focus Club. My name is Amani Maranga, and I'll be your moderator today, your host. And today we have a fantastic conversation on cyber security. Did you know that just between October and December last year, we had possibly 56 million cyber attacks in Kenya? 56 million. Think about that for a second. 56 million. Were you attacked? Do you even know if you were attacked? That's a conversation we're going to be having today, and I'm very fortunate to have you today listening to this, and hopefully we can interact. You can start chatting us online, telling us where you're from, what organizations you represent, if you identify with being attacked online, and also let us know what questions you have when we start having the conversation. Now, we'll be talking about Minet's thought leadership on cyber insurance because, well, if there's risk, then there needs to be insurance in the marketplace and also for you as an individual. We'll be talking to service providers, to subject matter experts on cyber risk, on data protection. We'll be talking to the regulator as well on the Data Protection Act and what there is for you in terms of your protection and how you can protect yourself. And we'll demonstrate convergence between the cyber industry, its risks, risk management, its mitigation, its transfer of that risk, and of course, modern trends. For sure, we have excellent guests for you, and I can't wait to introduce the first one for you in just a short while. But I want you to think about that 56 million attacks for a second. Just for a second, just think. Have you ever been attacked? Last week we saw Facebook, we saw Instagram, we saw WhatsApp go down. We saw spaces that we thought our lives are protected look, risky. And there's someone who's here who's an expert on risk. And I want to start by introducing to you a man you may know before because last year when we did the Focus Club, he was also here talking about risk, Mr. Peter Narangwi. Now, if you haven't met Mr. Peter Narangwi before, he is the Senior Risk Consultant at Minet. He's a General Manager heading Minet Risk Consulting Services. He's a Certified Fellow of the Institute of Risk Management in the UK, Chartered Insurance Risk Manager by the Chartered Institute of Insurance in the UK as well. He has also several other qualifications. One, which I found interesting, is that he's an engineer in electrical engineering, but also has qualifications in health and safety in addition to that electrical engineering. Peter is the perfect guest to start us off because he has over 20 experience in health, safety and risk, working with various organizations in Kenya and several other countries in Africa and the Middle East. And his recent engagement has seen him provide services in risk management in business continuity planning, which we talked about, with compliance audits, loss and control and prevention strategies, and also training in risk management, health, safety, and fire safety management. Thank you so much, Peter, for coming and being on board and for starting us off. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Are you safe? Are we safe? You know we're doing this online. Are we safe?
From a cyber point
From
of
a
view?
cyber point of view, yes.
Maybe. I'm not sure.
That can't be, you know, I had a conversation with Peter earlier, and I asked him, Peter, what's the one thing you'd like us to remember today? And he talked about the convergence of technology, our phones, our iPads, the things that we do with them. We talked about pilots and navigation systems and how all those are vulnerable to attack. That's why I'm asking you, what's the risk looking like now from a cyber perspective?
The interesting thing, Amani,
Yes.
is that cyber risk, just like any other risk, is evolving very fast. It's dynamic. It's changing every day. Things we were doing a few years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, may not be applicable. The protection systems we had last year may not work today. They become legacy protection systems. And with convergence of technology, where we are relying on less and less equipment, for instance, as I mentioned earlier, is that a mobile phone has become practically the bank for any person. It's also a tool for working. It's also a tool for communication and so many things. So someone accessing your phone practically has almost a half of your life or almost the entire of your life in his hands. So that's why I'm saying I'm not sure whether we are safe. I'm not sure how much we've protected ourselves and what we've done to protect ourselves.
That is a very scary thought. Joining us in this conversation as well is Martin Miklos. He's the director of TAI SOC, SOC standing for Security Operations Center in Kenya. He's one of the directors of TAI SOC and the founding managing director of ACPM IT Consulting. He's also the ISO 27001 lead auditor. He has more than 20 experience in international IT management and consultancy, cybersecurity project management, and software management. He is a founder and director of Neon Smart Homes, and he has consulted for many companies in cybersecurity and IT management. Welcome, Martin. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning, Amani. I'm doing very well. Thank you for the invite.
Martin, just hold on for a second. And we have a small technical hitch. I can't hear you. I'm sure the guests can hear you. Just give me one more second. As we get that sorted, Peter, why would you start by scaring us?
It's really not a scare. It's actually the reality. It's where we are now. Risk has been evolving. We've not evolved in our ways of managing, of assessing that risk, managing that risk, and putting in mitigation factors as quickly as the risk has been evolving. So when it comes to things that can happen, we could possibly lose our money in a day. We could, a guy sitting somewhere in the just a graduate, a graduate could be seated in his house and switch off an entire system and an entire company's operating system. There could be serious disruption to business. They can wipe out. I recently met a client, one of my clients, and they told me they lost 20 million shillings by wiring to someone a different account outside the country. And somebody had manipulated the email and changed the account. And when they did the wiring, and they can't trace the fella. And most likely is a young fella sitting somewhere in the comfort of their house. And the risk has really changed.
Wow, Martin, I don't know if you can, if you're online, and we can hear you now. Okay, you are in the smart homes business, and that's not where I wanted to start. But Peter has talked about the convergence of technology and how that convergence of technology poses a huge risk. What's your first comment on that?
Hybrid life together with the emergence of people working from home, the home office. So basically, what happened is that information that previously was stored in companies' computers, company databases, the company hardware. Now it's being used and not in private mobile phones, notebooks. So basically what happened is that when it comes to companies trying to defend their own data, and it's that a lot of large and big threats came into the picture. Because what happened is that now company data and private data sort of merging together in devices that are being used partly by people working from home and partly by people working in the companies. And then the same applies to come back to your, you mentioned home offices and smart homes. So the same applies to the devices that the people are using at home. So to give you an example, ransomware. So ransomware was a typical attack that had a huge emergence in the last 2 years, in the COVID years, because of how company databases were exposed to external world via the employees and people using their home devices to perform to work, obviously because that they had to, because they've been in the home office and they've been under the lockdown. So this is basically one of the major problems that the industry is facing today.
Thank you, Martin.
Yes?
Sorry. You talk about the growing prosperity of and digitization in Africa. I hear your example about working from home because of COVID and what that did to us, all of us having to shift our workplaces and how that creates risks. But you also talk about the growing prosperity and digitization of Africa generating new risks. What prosperity is this that you see, and what are some of these new risks that you think have been created by that prosperity?
Digital prosperity is that use of digital devices and technology, things that a couple of years ago were not common, suddenly become a very largely used. For example, take M-Pesa. So from Europe, what happened in Kenya is M-Pesa it looks like almost like a miracle. That you can have a online payment system which is so easy to use that anyone in the country can use it with only a few clicks on a very, very cheap mobile phone. That's really amazing. But the thing with that, and this is just an example, but the thing that came with the digitalization that everyone is using now mobile phone. Everyone is using the mobile phone to not only just making phone calls, obviously, but in many cases to conduct businesses. So now entire businesses can be run on mobile phone, and you can do things that you never did before, or you only did it by going into a office building and sitting down to a company computer and so on in a very controlled and organized environment. So all of these things now being done using a mobile phone, is being done in your own home, it's being done using very various devices. And this comes with greater risks because of the devices. This is technology, this is IT, and unfortunately, when it comes to the online world, every IT technology has its own vulnerabilities. So the more IT things you use,
the more vulnerable we become. You two are saying very scary things. You're both saying that this technology, these devices, these things that we're using every day are the same reason we have very high risk, and that risk could shut down our lives. There's risk of ransomware. I'd like you to also help me define some of these terms, Peter. There's, we're hearing, and I know they're not new, but to some people they might be new terms. We're hearing malware, we're hearing ransomware, we're hearing phishing, we're hearing DDoS, distributed denial of service, or what was that, botnet, as attacks. Help me understand, where are we sitting, or how does this risk evolve for us?
Thank you, Aman. maybe I should go to the basics of risk.
Yes.
Risk, or we use the word risk on day-to-day basis to define, to say many things. But in actual sense, when we talk about risk, we're looking at a probability of something happening that has an impact to either you as a person in safety or health, or it could have an impact on your business in terms of operations or profits, or something that has substantial impact in that case. But we also look at the probability of the same happening. Risk has always been there. Even in the olden times before we came to the age where we are with all interconnectivity, risk was still there in terms that someone would still hack into your systems, even using the old systems. But at the moment now, it has become far much easier. And therefore, when we talk about cyber risk, if you look at it from a very basic point of view, again, we are saying someone unauthorized, someone without authority, someone with the right to access a system, either ICT system or operating system or industrial control system or any other system. It could be a security system, it could be a financial banking system. Someone has access to that illegally and then manipulates. So there's a compromise of a system that you use for day-to-day work or for an activity that is compromised, and someone either uses that illegally, to either steal from you. So if it's a banking system or financial system, they could steal from you. So as an organization, you're losing money, you're losing, of course, it disrupts your operations. But also we've seen recently the risk what organizations are doing, and we've even state actors playing into that role, whereas cyber has been used, attacks have been used to disrupt operations of other organizations, and public utility organizations have really suffered that. We've seen in some Western countries, an entire water system is shut off. Electricity system like the Kenyan KPLC, someone shuts it off illegally and manipulates the system that you use to operate and starts demanding money. Now he's taking you at ransom. So we talk of ransomware.
Okay.
So he's taking, either he can encrypt that system which you use to operate and then start demanding for money. So that again affects you. It can be used to attack, to make, to spoil things and actually cause damage to even any other systems. Think of it, I'm looking at things that we use at home. The Internet of Things. Nowadays, with people able to operate their equipment at home and all that, but can you imagine someone doing that for you illegally and doing the wrong thing, mixing, maybe manipulating somewhere where you keep your medicine, switching off the refrigerator, for instance, or maybe you have a pacemaker and adjusting the settings the doctor had done. So all that has come as part of what you're talking about, risk, the cyber risk. So basically the whole idea is someone sitting out there with legally accesses or compromises your protection system. And as Martin said, for instance, working from home has allowed so many openings that it's difficult. Previously, when everybody was working in an organization like here, it's easy to have a firewall protection and make sure that this is a very controlled environment. But can you imagine people are working from multiple points? It's so difficult to protect all those and make them so secure. But a hacker can access your home Wi-Fi, use the same system you're using to access the office and start doing things that really compromise the way we do business. And really it can cause, I saw an article from UK, one of the senior person saying one of the key business risks in UK, actually it was a tweet yesterday, that the key risk to business today in UK is ransomware, because people are taking organizations at ransom, encrypting data or stealing data and threatening to release it. And of course there are consequences because of Data Protection Act and the financial consequences that come with that. So it's really a complex issue that we all need to take very seriously.
I hear you and I believe you. And I mean, we've recently seen leaks of documents online with banking information of people across the world, which I'm sure they didn't want, exposed. And no one wants even my M-Pesa balance, which may have Fuliza. No one wants that exposed. Martin, let me come to you. And when you talk about working from home, you talk about there's a term you mentioned which is shadow IT. Talk to me about shadow IT and the corporate vulnerabilities that are caused by employees shifting to home office work.
So basically, shadow IT, just very quickly. Shadow IT is when some sort of IT system or solution is introduced in a company that is not made through the IT department, so to speak. So, for example, just to give you an example, it happened in many companies that people were all over the place working from home, so on, a different situation. So naturally, they tried to do their best. So what happened in many cases, for example, they started using online software services. Or they set up a Google Drive, and a working group, they started to share documents by themselves just to get organized and have the work done, because the corporate IT was not available. And it was not available because it was optimized to work from the office. Like Peter said, that the IT was always made it in a way that to make sure that everything in the office is working properly. So basically what happened is that groups in the company divisions, they're using various online services that they just sign up, or they were started sharing documents using their own various data sharing devices and so on. And all this happened outside of the IT departments or IT's oversight, which was necessary at that time, obviously, because we had the COVID situation, but you had to make sure that you can work at companies, it doesn't shut down. So there was nothing to do at that time, but this carried on this whole risk of now we having operations and we having things that don't have the necessary cybersecurity oversee as working from the actual office. And this came with a large risk. I mean, talking about the vulnerability of the private devices, mobile phones, laptops, for example, and also the vulnerability of the various services that the people they signed on, and then not to talking about the data leakage risk when it comes to sharing company data on your private Google Drive, for example. And I'm saying Google Drive, but it could be anything else.
It could be anything. It could be any cloud solution. Thank you for that, and thank you for the term, because I'm going to use it now, shadow IT. You also talk about IT security as a service, and I want you to mention that for a bit. But as you do that, maybe you could also tell us, as a service provider for IT security, what are some of the other trends that you've seen that maybe we haven't mentioned that maybe we should be looking out for?
Look, cloud is going to be a big thing, obviously. So there is an entirely different approach. You require an entirely different approach to handle the security of the cloud. And also there is another trend which is happening now, is that companies, they slowly realize that it's very, very complicated, and has to make sure that they can defend their own their own data. And cybersecurity slowly moving away from being a product-based concept into being a service. So you cannot provide, if you are an IT, you cannot provide for your company and employees proper cybersecurity only by buying various products, like softwares, licenses, and installing into your system. That's not necessary. That's not enough these days. So this is one of the major things that been realized, that companies, they realize, especially in the last couple of years.
So you're saying that we need to start looking at cybersecurity not as something we spend capital expenditure on, the licenses, the firewalls, the servers that we buy, but we need to move those budgets into an OPEX budget, where we start to think about how we are constantly serving ourselves and updating ourselves on cybersecurity, and maybe giving a third party this space. Isn't that also risky?
Well, basically, you approach this as a service. And the issue with cybersecurity today is that it's a worldwide phenomenon, I mean, situation, so to speak, that there are the knowledge on cybersecurity and the personnel to actually that can handle cybersecurity is very scarce all over the world. There are very, very few cybersecurity professionals out there. And it's basically a very, very hard task for a company to have their own in-house cybersecurity experience or cybersecurity division or people. So at one, it's actually a smart thing to do is to go out and look for services that companies that provide services that can help you with this.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. I'll get back to you to give us some final remarks. But before I do that, Mr. Peter, I have a question for you from a local perspective, and because you're offering a product that we'll be talking about a little later, what are some of the risks or trends that you have seen locally that you're saying we also need to watch out for? And this could be for your potential corporate clients, but also as a person, as Amani, as I'm walking around, you know, how do I become aware of what I should be looking out for?
Thank you very much, Aman. And I just want to repeat what somebody Martin talked about, assessing the risk.
You can react to that.
But basically, if you look at it from a risk management point of view, and risk management basically is managing risk in an organized form.
Yes.
You're managing risk in an organized form. So each organization will have their own challenges and exposures that are there. So I would approach it from one, as at a very basic level, the organization should be able to identify their weak points and their area. They should identify their risk, what can happen. For instance, if they're handling personal and identifiable data, which is protected by the Data Protection Act, that they should be worried exactly what would happen if someone hacked into the system and leaked that data. If they are a medical service provider, they have a medical data about individuals. So they should identify that particular risk, then start looking, assessing exactly what would be the impact of the same to the organization, what would, if this or that happens, what would happen. That they can actually use an expert to help them put all that into format, into a formal way that doesn't miss out some important points. And then from there they can think of how to mitigate. At the mitigation level now, they need experts. You need now to mitigate and put in systems, the systems that will protect your cyber resilience or cyber security, improve that. That's why you need now experts. But initially, you need to sit as an organization and say, these are our concerns, this is what is likely to happen, this is what we do. If someone accesses our financial system, we'll lose money, we'll lose confidence, we'll lose reputation. And then putting that into context, they can now get to a point where they involve a third-party expert to help them now put in mitigation factors. But again, apart from that, apart from putting mitigation factors, we know all these systems are put by people, and that those people, of course, as human beings, we are limited to what we can do and how much we can protect ourselves. You need to transfer part of that risk. For a very basic example is, if it's a hospital, for instance, you've already identified that you handle clients' data, patients' data that is identifiable, that could have reputation. You could have fines from the regulator. You could be sued. So there's so much money involved. You could still also be unable to operate and lose chance of your profit. So what can you transfer? It's possible to transfer part of that protection, where if you lost profit, then someone else, an insurer or someone else, would be able to pay a portion of the same to protect your profit. Or if you're sued, you're in court, there's a litigation cost, and it can be very, very expensive. You can imagine 1,000 people suing you, and all of them has a lawyer, and you lose that case. So you're paying about so many lawyers, hundreds of lawyers, and it can be extremely costly. That's a risk you can transfer. So apart from putting in mitigation factors using experts, as Martin has said, there are very few experts, but it's possible to use an expert to help you create resilience in your protection of your systems and data, and anything else that would be compromised by a third party. Then from there, transfer that risk to somebody else who would be able to stand in. And in most cases, insurers also have expertise around, and they will help you so that you can protect your business continuity. Remember, at the end of the day, any business that you create, and any business created, is out there to make a profit for the shareholders, to continue to be there tomorrow, and to grow. So if you need to protect yourself, you need to protect those three.
Wow. I will be coming to release you shortly. Martin, do you have any last words, anything you want to pass across? Let us know in terms of trends and risks that maybe you haven't had a chance to say.
Look, I just want to just to follow up on what Peter said, that yes, interestingly enough, but ransomware become the single biggest risk today when it comes to cyber risk for companies and the private people as well. So this particular risk alone worth for every company to just sit back a little bit and do a reevaluation of their risk vectors. So they just do some sort of analysis that what are my risks and how can I better protect myself. And then they will see that what would be their best action to take against these types of risks. And then I still believe that that's something that requires them to sign on some sort of solution that provides a security service continuous security monitoring service for them.
Right. Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you for joining us. You've heard him, director at TIRE SOC, and people who provide security, cyber security, and so you can talk to them. You've also heard from Peter Narangwi, who is in risk management here at Minet, and he has told you that it's the probability that you could be harmed or experience an adverse effect. He's saying that this is a high probability. Both of them have said this is a high probability because of the convergence of technology that we have today. All our data is somewhere, and that data could be compromised, and that technology could be compromised, and that poses a risk. He has said that we have started to see some of those risks. Ransomware has been touted as probably one of the highest risks so far. I think the report I saw may put ransomware at almost 46 million attacks in Kenya this last year, and that's a crazy number. 46 million anything is a crazy number. So when you think about it from a threat perspective, that's huge. And Peter has also told us that, listen, you could be able to cover some of that risk. You might be able to transfer some of that risk. Once you've been able to do an audit, understand where you're vulnerable, you've been able to understand what the impact of that vulnerability could be in your business, and I think that's what you said, and how you can mitigate that vulnerability. Also, Martin has told us that then we need to start thinking about cybersecurity as a service and not just as products. This is just the start of this conversation, because then we're going to go into what does the law say? What does that Data Protection Act all about? How do we as corporates and as people interpret that law? Are we protected? Is it just more compliance that we need to get into? And then we'll come and talk back about some of the solutions, some of the ways we can mitigate our cyber risk, and even what can and cannot be covered. Don't go away. We're going to take a quick short break. As we take this break, please look at the survey that we're going to put online for you. Please participate in the survey, and in a few minutes, we'll be back with our next guests.
Tomorrow has a way of sometimes surprising by presenting things that you certainly weren't expecting today. Africa's tomorrow. Our future is predictable. Billions are being invested in infrastructure. Our middle class is growing. Agricultural sectors are thriving. The world is looking to us to replenish their energy and mineral resources. Our entrepreneurs are making their mark on the world. Today in Africa, a prosperous future can be assured if the risks of tomorrow are secured. Meeting the uncertainties of tomorrow is our everyday business. For 70 years, we have helped manage risks and secure the growth of the continent. We've been there as risk advisors for farmers, for governments and investors building infrastructure vital for growth, for power grids that power economies, for mines that are the treasure trove of our resources, settling claims for properties destroyed by fire, for employers and employees who want to secure their health and retirement benefits, protecting businesses against the threat of cybercrime, data loss, and other risks. We've been there as risk advisors for all of life's unpredictable moments. Our business stands on 3 pillars: risk, reinsurance, and people. For 70 years, we've been an agile, trusted advisor to clients who want custom and homegrown solutions rather than conventional offerings. Our values are at the heart of our business and our relationships: honesty, expertise, agility, respect, teamwork. We are Aon's trusted global network correspondent in Africa. We are Minet. For every one of the thousands of businesses and people we serve, and for many of life's unpredictable moments, our purpose is clear. We partner with you to secure tomorrow.
All right, good morning once again. How are you doing? How was that first conversation? Are you scared? I am. I'm completely terrified. Going back to Kabambes, not using smartphones anymore almost. We've heard that we are at risk. It is possible that the convergence of our technologies could be putting us at higher cyber risk. We've been defined for what that risk looks like. We've been told about what the highest risk right now is in terms of, especially from a corporate space, which is ransomware. And we've been told that it's possible to mitigate some of these risks, as well as it is possible to cover some of these risks. The government in 2019 put together the Data Protection Act. And in this Data Protection Act, then people who collect data were given some regulations on how then they should protect that data, how they can process that data, what that data can and cannot be used for, and even put penalties on what would happen if that data was misused. Is this act really good for us? Is it just more work for corporates to get into compliance? Are we really as protected as individuals? When you walk into a building and you have to give your ID number, you have to give your phone number, you have to give all this personal data, what do they do with it? How do they protect it from not being used against you? This is the conversation we're about to have, the legal conversation around cybersecurity. And I could not be more fortunate to have these 2 wonderful ladies. And let me just say this, it's very cool that I'm having 2 women giving us thought leadership on cybersecurity. I'm very excited about this. And I'll start with Rose Mosero, who is on my right here. Rose Mosero is currently serving as a policy, regulatory, and legal advisor at the Data Commissioner's Office in the Office of Data Protection Commissioner Kenya. Prior to her 2nd month to this office, Rose served as policy and regulatory advisor and legal advisor to the Cabinet Secretary in the Ministry of ICT, Innovation and Youth Affairs on matters relating to the mandate of the ministry, including the digital economy, which is big in data, technology and data protection. She's also dually registered as a lawyer, admitted both in Kenya, in the High Court of Kenya as an advocate and as an Australian legal practitioner. She is a certified information privacy professional and also a certified information privacy manager. And I learned earlier as I was speaking to her that she also knows something about cybersecurity and terrorism. Welcome, Rose.
Thank you so much for having me.
That is a mouthful, and congratulations on all your achievements.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, I'm glad I know you. I feel safe. next to Rose is no stranger to you, especially if you've been part of this focus club. She's the general manager, head of legal, Rachel Mwendwa. She is an advocate of the High Court. She is master's in international relations. She is, like me, a certified professional mediator. She's also, of course, a seasoned lawyer. She has worked over 10 years in the financial institution sector, and more specifically in insurance, pension and asset management fields. She's a member of FIDA in the Law Society of Kenya and currently working on her certification as a company secretary. And we are very fortunate to have you. Thank you, Rachel, for coming.
Thank you, Amani. Thank
Right.
you for having us.
So let's start with you, Rose. Okay? This Data Protection Act, I think it's of November 2019, it sets pace, and I think a good pace, in terms of how my data is potentially protected. Maybe to start, assuming that there's not much knowledge about the Data Protection Act, maybe we could start to think, what are the highlights of this act? What are some of the things that, are covered in the act? Yes.
Right. Perhaps maybe I'll take you a step back, Kamani, and to understand why the Data Protection Act is important, I think there needs to be an understanding of our legal framework and our policy framework in this country. So just by way of background, all of us have interacted with the Kenya Vision 2030, which effectively sees an overarching goal to promote Kenya as to leapfrog it to a middle income economy. And what it does is it looks at three pillars, which is a social, economic, and political pillar. Of that, the actualization of the Vision 2030 is done through medium-term plans called MTPs. We're currently on our third one, which looks at the Big Four agenda. ICT is seen to be an enabler to achieve Kenya's Vision 2030, but also to achieve the Big Four agenda. And now with this, there's issues of the digital economy, which is hailed globally as a thing that will take economies such as Kenya, I guess, lower income countries in Asia and all of Africa to a level where we don't have to go through industrialization the same way that European countries went through. So we're effectively taking a step further and jumping through those hoops and immediately just ensuring that we are actually achieving a digital economy. And when you look at the digital economy, there are some specific things that you need to look at. In Kenya, we did a document called the Digital Economy Blueprint in 2019, prior to the enactment of the Data Protection Act, and it looked at 5 pillars, which was a digital government, which looks at things like your e-citizen services, digital business, which looks at the financial sector, so fintech, content, and then trade, just generally, so e-commerce. And then we look at infrastructure, which not only looks at digital infrastructure, but looks at generic infrastructure, roads, how do those complement with digital infrastructure. We look at innovation-driven entrepreneurship. We all know that Kenya is deemed to be a Silicon Savannah, so how do we ensure that we're encouraging our youth and the Kenyan citizenry to actually participate and innovate around Kenyan solutions for Africa. And then we also have digital skills and values, which cybersecurity comes under to some extent, knowing how to safely use devices. But in all of this, there was an underlying issue for, if we're having a digital economy, how do we ensure that we have robust structures to ensure that it is safe, that there is trust and things like this. And that's where data protection comes in. So there's a lot of collection of our data online. We have social media, we have just e-commerce services where you're constantly exchanging information. How do I know that my information is safe? And data protection was hailed to be one of the key legislative frameworks that is required for us to have a robust digital economy. And so from that, the Data Protection Act was enacted. But we also have to look at it in comparison to the right to privacy that is in the Constitution, specifically Article 31. And when you look at that, it has a right to communication. It has a right to protection of information in regards to children, spouses, properties, and what have you. But what data protection goes further to do is it looks at it in a digital framework and says, okay, fine, so I'm giving out my information regularly, you're giving out your information to the guards downstairs or whatever it is. How do I as an individual ensure that my information is safeguarded, but also how is the person who's collecting my information, what are their duties in regards to my information? So broadly, how I think about the Data Protection Act is that it's structured in three ways. So one is that there must be a lawful purpose for collecting information. So if I'm collecting information as a guard, I'm relying on a statutory obligation to do so, which is in the, I think, a Privacy Security Authority Act or Agencies Act. And then there is the issue of data subjects. So me as an individual, I've got rights. So as a data controller, data processor, the people who are collecting the information, they need to ensure that this information is being done with my rights and best interests at heart. And the third one is obviously safeguards and security, which we've spoken about in terms of cybersecurity and things like this. So how do I, as a data processor and data controller, put in appropriate safeguards to then ensure that the other two things, and including me as an individual front of mind, is protected? And this can be, this is important not only for protection of an individual, but also for business continuity and such like things. So there is a commercial aspect of data protection that we also need to look at when we're reading the legislation that might not be clear from how it is being done, but those in broadly.
So those three, the lawful reason.
Yes.
Okay. The second one is my
a data subject's interest.
My data subject. We'll discuss that term, data subject, my interest, and then a potential. The potentially commercial interest as well.
Yeah, so the safeguards that you're putting into, which have an overflowing effect, which could be of a commercial benefit.
All right. Thank you for that. And for the background as well. So my question for you, Rachel, is then from the corporate perspective, what did this Data Protection Act mean?
So as has been rightfully pointed out, the Act came into place in November 2019, and the commencement date was also November 2019.
Yes.
So what it meant is that organizations had to think about, are we data controllers? Are we data processors? What sort of data do we collect?
So first is this identifying where do I sit in this space. Okay?
Yes. So the data controller defines the sort of data that is required, and the data processor processes the data either by recording, storing, accessing, or just transferring it to another party. So then you also had to think about then with respect to the data that I'm collecting, why am I collecting it? What are the principles governing the data? Is it lawful? Is it fair? Is it necessary? Is it accurate? Is it excessive? And organizations have to think about with respect to the piece of information that they are collecting, why is it important? For instance, if you walk into a building and they ask for your name and your phone number and maybe your physical address or your marital status, how is, for instance, your marital status important to your access to the building? So organizations have to really question, why are we collecting this data, and to make sure that the data they're collecting is not excessive and it is for a particular purpose. For
What's
instance,
the threshold for excessive? You know, it's a good term, but at what point? So the guard downstairs asked me for my name. He asked me for my ID number, which maybe should be sufficient. But he also asked me for my phone number. So maybe, you know, he should have had one or the other. My phone number can be used to get my ID number if you needed it. Then he asked me the organization that I come from. So at what point is this excessive? What's the threshold for excessive?
I think that's determined by the purpose that you're collecting information. So say, for example, with the guard situation, or maybe even simply for your employment purposes. If you're employed somewhere, you give information in regards to your name, obviously a bit of your background, but you don't have to give your employer your health records, because it really shouldn't have any bearing on how you do your actual work. The whole purpose of them collecting your employment information is for the purposes of either contractual engagement with you or to hold you accountable for the work that you need to do. So determining what's excessive really is pegged on the purpose. So I think that the principle itself is called purpose limitation and data minimization. So those are two. So you collect only the information that is required for the purpose, and you have to be extremely clear of what the purpose is.
Okay, that's very interesting.
I want to add to that thought. When we're talking about personal data, then it means to personal identifiable information. So anything that your disclosure would relate to that information being linked to you would then fall under personal data. So there's data that you then share that is not necessarily personal data in that respect.
All right, so
Yeah.
you were saying you had to first define yourselves.
Yes.
As whether you're data processors, or what was the other one? Data
controllers.
Controllers.
Yes.
And then you had to figure out then, purpose for this data, what is excessive.
Yes.
But what has, okay, so I wanted to let you finish that thought.
Okay.
How did you respond to this? What did it mean to have this Data Protection Act for you?
So one of the ways that you can then see, sort of like do an evaluation about yourself as an organization is to carry out a data impact assessment, which is sort of like an audit to see your compliance level with the acts, to evaluate the controls you need to put in place, the gaps that are there that you need to correct. So every organization, I think, after understanding the requirements and the ambit and of the act, would then be evaluating yourself through an impact assessment, where you then see, am I 20% compliant, 80% compliant, 60% compliant? Then from there, the next step is to now correct the...
Course correct
Yes.
towards compliance.
Yes, so towards compliance. So this would involve now either putting the requisite compliance measures in place, setting up a team to look at the requirements for compliance and the journey for compliance. And I think the other thing that organizations need to know, it's a multifaceted effort. So you need support and collaboration from the risk and compliance department, from the legal department, from the operations sector, from the sales and business team, because data from the HR department, because data is all over in an organization. So by checking all the different sections, then you can then see, do we have the requisite consents to even hold this data? Is it purposeful and necessary data? And then have we been keeping it excessively? Should we archive it? Should we destroy it? Do we need to have people now sign consent form because that's a requirement in the regulation? Why do we need this information? Is it part of the maybe insurance policies that we are collecting? And therefore there's transfer either from the client to the us as an intermediary to the underwriter. Are there necessary safeguards with each of those organizations with respect to transfer of personal data? So it's a holistic exercise to check whether you're safe and the data is accurate and protected.
Wow. I want to just follow that rabbit hole for a little bit, because then since I'm not a data collector, neither am I a data processor, I'm probably just a data provider here, or what you call the data subject. And let's discuss for a little bit, what are my rights? What am I, as a data subject, what am I entitled to? Where can I say yes or no? How do I be vigilant in protecting my data, in playing my part in protecting my data? And as you answer that, Rose, you could also tell me, how are we moving towards compliance as a country with the Act, or is it a struggle?
So I'll start by talking about the data subjects' rights. There are a number of them that are in the Act, and some fall in one provision, but others are scattered all over. So the first right that is an absolute right is your right to access information.
Okay.
So if Rachel has your information, then you should be able to ask her, can I please have access to information you have with respect to...
And that's everyone, the banks, everyone.
Everyone,
Okay.
everyone. And
Okay.
it's an absolute right. And so there can't be a response saying we can't provide that information to you, because ultimately you are that information belongs to you. And when I say that information belongs to you, if there's any value add that is of commercial benefit to an institution, that doesn't count as personal data. So it's only the information they hold about you that is personal data.
Okay.
And then you have another absolute right, which is also a duty to a data controller or data processor to be informed. So technically, before collecting any information about you, you really should know what information is being collected, why it's being collected, what it's going to be used for, the technical or organizational safeguards that will be put in place to protect your information. If the information is to be provided by you voluntarily or is mandatory, what are the consequences of not providing that information, who it will be transferred to, if it's going to be transferred to a third party, what safeguards do they have? So all of that information you must have prior to collecting that information.
No one is compliant. No one.
So usually what happens is people tend to have what is called privacy notices or privacy statement. So this enables them, instead of having to come to you and tell you this is the information, they put it on their website, or if you're logging into an app, you usually will get this information. Most times you don't read it because
It's a lot of jargon.
terms and conditions, not interested. But those are the absolute rights that you have. And then you have a right to obviously request for your information to be deleted. That is not absolute. If there's a conflicting interest, then as long as it's not adversely affecting you as a data subject, then that will be, your request can be denied. You have a right to rectification of information. You have a right not to have an automated decision being made against you that would affect you. So say, for example, I always like to use an insurance example, so forgive me, it has nothing, I'm not saying that this is a practice that you have, but say, for example, you've got a health condition or you live in a particular area in Nairobi, and there is a machine learning sort of software or AI that determines that if you live in a specific area and you have this health condition, then you will not be insured. And that's an automated decision because that's a bias that has been put into the computer. However, there are other factors to be considered. So if you apply for insurance, you might be automatically denied by the machine. However, if someone else looks at it and sees all these other factors that haven't been considered, they might make another decision. So what the Act says is that there must be human intervention when there is an automated decision made against a person that would have a significant impact to that person, or it affects the rights and freedoms of that person. So that's as we're going into technology, that's something that really does need to be considered. So those are some of the rights that you have. And also, I think I've talked about the right to be forgotten or erasure and things like this. So yes, those are the rights that you have.
Listen, you must look at that Data Protection Act. I keep saying that a lot of the problems we have and especially in this country, is ignorance. The Act is there. I found it online. It didn't take me long as I was researching for this. Literally, the search for the Act, I saw it on the Kenya Law website, and I was able to download the Gazette notice and read the Act and understand some of these things. Do it for yourself. I know you have some regulations that you're also trying to put together that have not yet been enacted. What are those?
So we've got 3 regulations that are coming into place. So the first one is the general regulations. And effectively what these do is that they expound on the obligations of a data controller and data processors, the rights of individuals, and how exactly an individual such as myself can exercise those rights. So what I need to do, the request forms that I need to make to a data controller and data processor. Rachel's spoken about a data protection impact assessment. So how to go about doing a data protection impact assessment, especially in the instances when a data protection impact assessment must be submitted to the data commissioner. And this is specifically in instances where there's a high risk to a data subject. So if you're processing sensitive information, if you're using new innovative technology in your organization that you haven't used before, if you're using AI or automated decision making in your structures and things like this, and it really also expands on issues of, there's something called data privacy by default and design, and the things that you need to take into account, which are the principles that that Rachel spoke about. So you talk about lawfulness, fairness, transparency, purpose minimization, data minimization, storage limitation, accuracy, integrity, confidentiality, accessibility, and accountability. So just the things that you really need to put forward in mind at every step of the data processing lifecycle. And when I talk about processing, it's a catch-all term, so it means from collection to destruction, the things that you need to think about in terms of data protection.
Right, thank you very much.
And
for
then
that.
there's, sorry,
Oh,
and then those are the general ones.
Yes.
Then there's the registration ones, which will mostly affect data controls and data processors. So anyone collecting information would have to register with the data commissioner.
Okay, so you are going to know everyone
So we
who's
will know
holding
we will
data.
know everyone
Okay.
who's holding data.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a threshold for this, which is that we won't be collecting from your mama boggers or people who are handling small information. And then the third one is data protection, compliance handling procedure, compliance handling and enforcement procedures, which is mostly a guide for data controls and data processes, as well as data subjects to know how complaints will be handled, as well as how enforcement procedures will be managed by the office.
I'll get back to you shortly. And what I want us to discuss as we close is basically for you is basically how do I get information, how do I get educated, okay, about data protection, both as a corporate and as as an individual, and how can I complain when the Wochi, downstairs wants to know my marital status, But before we get to that, and maybe as we look at your customers, as you look also from a legal perspective, and we look at that compliance journey of the Data Protection Act, my question is, what are your challenges from a compliance perspective? What are some of the things that we need to be considering as customers, as corporates, as people who then are either data collectors or data processors? What are those challenges that you've faced so far, with compliance especially?
Okay, so I think with any piece of legislation, a novel piece of legislation, there's always the how do we go about complying, what do we need to do. I think for almost a year since the legislation was passed, the Office of the Data Commissioner was not set up. I think it was set up in November 2020. And therefore there was an year of, okay, this office is coming and the office is going to thrash and punish and we just need to comply. Then there were also a number of parts in the legislation that we want to comply, but how do we go about it? So the regulations that Rose has talked about will provide a very clear roadmap in terms of how to comply, in terms of the nitty-gritties for each and every organization. But then what we should all be alive to the fact is that the Act is in place and we all have to be compliant with the provisions of the Act, and every organization then needs to say, this is not just another piece of legislation I need to comply with. There are benefits to being compliant to this Act, to the organization, over and above saving yourself from penalties or saving yourself from enforcement and regulatory request from the regulator. There are other benefits in terms of you promote ethical behavior in your organization, because then you put the data subjects' rights as paramount in your operations and in your processes. Then you collect a lot of data and therefore you have a good data assets, and you can use this, you can monetize the data, you can use the data analytics to give you very useful information and relevant information to help you then form strategies that will then govern your business. You're creating investor or public confidence and trust. You're protecting your brand and your reputation as an organization. So it's a legislation that we must all comply with, but it's really above budgeting for the Office of the Data Protection Officer or an audit assessment. It has far more benefits than costs, and that would be the urge that it's a good piece of legislation, because then we have data everywhere in this age. I think globalization and social media apps and tools, and therefore anything that gives extra protection is always welcome.
It's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
And I like the way you're saying that these things could, they actually have, the act has benefits, or compliance to the act has benefits. If we comply, that could also be, monetary benefits over and above, trust, ethics, and those things that help us continue to do business well, and our customers trusting us. But you mentioned something which I wanted to get to, in terms of now my protection as a data subject. I have PTSD with the word subject, so. You said, one of the things you could do is monetize data. And for me, that was an interesting thing you said, because, I don't know if I want someone monetizing my data, or, and I didn't mean, I know you didn't mean personal identifiable data, but people are monetizing that, okay? There was also this phenomenon, especially when mobile lending started, where people would literally hack into your phone and send texts or messages to people in your phone number to tell you to pay the loan. I don't know if you guys had that, but it was a phenomenon. It was something that people talked about where, I borrow money from a mobile lender, I don't pay it back on time, they somehow access my contacts, and they send messages to my contacts to embarrass me to get to pay back the loan. And and this is what I was saying now, what do I do about that? Okay, so I might be able to protect myself in some ways, but where can I complain? How can I, seek retribution? Where can I go and say, those guys are monetizing my data. I want a piece of that action as well. What is my space for that?
So we'll start by dealing with the issue of just a lack of awareness.
Yeah.
There's a general lack of awareness on data protection and the things that, I guess, technology at large. So when you talk about the digital financial lenders calling your boss, maybe you're going for an interview and you have this person in your phone contacts and they've called ahead to say, Amani owes me 1K, so can you tell him when you see him to pay me back? And some of these things we do and we don't understand why they happen, but most times when you go onto your apps and you download an app, usually they say, do you consent to us accessing your contacts? And you'll say yes. And because you've allowed them to access your contacts, they'll then use this information, mostly and lawfully, to contact other people without their consent, because they also need to be able to say, yes, I want to be contacted. And so it's twofold. There's a need for awareness by private and public institutions that are collecting information, but for individuals as well to understand if I'm doing something or if I'm getting a service, what are my rights? So there's awareness in that. But in terms of complaints, it's very simple. Now you can just go to our website, www.odpc.go.ke. There's a complaints form online. You give us the information, we'll deal with it. You can also come to our office. We're based on the ground floor of CA, hopefully moving soon. You can come there. You can find our contact details online and call us if you wish to make a complaint. So there are many ways that you can make a complaint, and we will investigate if you've got any issues about this. There's also a lot of forums that we're running as well, such as this, to ensure that people actually know what their obligations are. We run forums with a number of other organizations to ensure that on the data subject side, that they're aware of their rights. So it's an ongoing thing. But I will say we are a new office, as has been said by Rachel. We're only about currently 8 of us in the office, and it's a very, very big task because it's regulating it's regulating everyone, effectively everyone who uses data, who collects data, and so it's a big task. So there is budgetary issues that come into play in terms of having the proper structures, which thankfully in this financial year we have received the adequate budgetary allocation, and so we will be having a lot more people come on board to ensure that we're serving the office properly and actually fulfilling the mandate. Not that we weren't doing so before, we were, but we need more hands on deck. And this will then ensure that we're able to push out the message of compliance and assist as well data processors and and data controllers to put in place those safeguards that they need to, which we've been working with. So also on the side of data controls and data processors, we do advisories. And so if there's any issues that you might have in regards to compliance, we're accessible, we're reachable. You can send us an email at info@odpc.go.ke, and we'd always respond and come back to you on issues regarding compliance.
Thank you very much, Rose and Rachel. This was such an enlightening conversation, much better than the one I had with Peter and Martin earlier, which was very scary. I've learned a lot. Listen, you have to educate yourself. You have to take your own data protection into your own hands. Figure out what are your rights. Figure out where consent is necessary. Okay, this is one more place we need to seek consent, or or at least for the first time as a guy, I feel like I can ask for consent. So this is really cool. So and even just understanding as an organization, understanding where you are on the compliance journey, what you need to do to be compliant, and I'd say talk to Minet, talk to their legal advisory in terms of that that space, but also talk to the ODPC. They say they have advisory services for you available, and I want to live in a world where I feel safe, where I feel my data is safe, and I feel like I can trust everywhere I spend my money and people who take my data. Guys who are doing KYC. For whatever financial products that I'm buying or I'm using, that my data is safe. I want to feel safe, and thank you for helping me feel just a little safer. Don't go away. We'll be back talking about how can you now protect yourself. What are the solutions to cyber risk? What can be covered? What can be insured? What risk can you pass on? What risk do you need to take on? Some of these conversations that we don't know where to start. I don't know where to start. I have people who have solutions for you. We'll take a little survey. Please don't go too far.
Digital transformation has created significant opportunities for innovation, convenience, and efficiencies. However, the recent developments, including the pandemic, has exposed most organizations to the risks that are attendant to the digital transformation. Particularly, we have seen cyber attacks on most organizations, which has caused enormous losses. Join us on the 13th of October 2021 for a focused discussion on cyber solutions that are available, which would help in protecting your enterprises. We look forward to seeing you.
I hope your morning is going as good as mine, and thank you for participating on the service. Thank you for staying on as we have this conversation. This is the Minet Focus Club if you're just joining us, and this year we're talking cyber security. Minet Focus Club is set up every year with the sole purpose of giving thought leadership on different areas that could be covered from a risk perspective. And cyber risk, as we have heard from our previous guests, especially when we had Mr. Peter Nangwi earlier and Martin, that we are at an increasingly high level of risk every time the more our technology converges. We've also heard from Rachel and Rose, both who are working, one with a compliance in the office of the ODPC and also with legal here at Minet, that there is legal framework to protect our data. Just one of the things that forms cybersecurity risk, and that then there is need for us as individuals, as organizations, to educate ourselves about what the Data Protection Act is saying, what compliance looks like, and what our individual responsibility is towards our data protection. But then the question comes, so what do I do about generally protecting myself in the cyberspace? What do I do as an organization when we've been told that to look at cybersecurity as a service and not just as products? And as Peter may have hinted earlier, some of these risks can be covered. What are they? What can be covered? What cannot be covered? What can be transferred? What cannot be transferred? How do we expand that insurance space? And that's why I have two Johns to discuss this with you. And I'm very fortunate to be able to introduce on my far right Mr. John M. Gangla, who is Associate General Manager for Minet Risk Services. John commenced his insurance career as, with one of the leading regional underwriters as a management trainee, and he's had various roles both in underwriting, claims, and marketing. He's previously worked with insurance brokers, but has been with Minet for 15 years, where he has served and specialized in emerging risks, cybersecurity being one of them. John has contributed thought leadership papers to Minet magazine and has benefited from training in cyber insurance and specialized in reinsurance of reinsurers and carriers. He is a degree holder from the University of Nairobi and also a chartered member of the Chartered Institute of Insurance, London. He has had various assignments in cyber insurance, and he is leading in the information technology, pioneering cyber insurance approach in Kenya, and testing what we are now calling cyber resilience and the environment that needs to be covered from that perspective. He is passionate for emerging risks, and I hear his passion now sits in one of these risks, which is cybersecurity. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. John Gangla. And next to him is not one of little means as well, Mr. John Mbagi. We did talk to his colleague earlier, Martin, who was here telling us about some of the emerging risks. Mr. Mbagi is the head of the Security Operating Center at Taiso, Kenya. He is also the technical SOC lead at iLab Africa at Strathmore University. He is actively involved in technical cybersecurity research, analysis of emerging cyber threats, threat-informed defense, and he is also an adept at training and educating technology consumers on relevant cybersecurity procedures and preventative measures. Basically, he's the Jack Bauer of cybersecurity. Karibu, Bwana John Mbagi.
Asante sana.
I want to start with you because I'm scared. And the people, your colleague Martin and Peter Nangwi, who was here earlier, sufficiently scared us about the potential threats that there are. Also, like I said, reading the report that we were given by, that I was able to see and shared by you, Mr. Gangla, from the Communication Authority, about the number of threats and cyber threat events that happen every year. I mean, the number is astronomical. And right now, as I'm having this conversation, I feel powerless. And I want to ask you, is there anything that I can do as a person to protect myself? But also from an organizational standpoint, how do we start to create safety around our cybersecurity?
Well, thank you for having me here today.
You're welcome, sir.
And I'll break it down and start looking at it from a personal, let's say,
my everyday usage.
Yes.
Okay.
So basically, you interact with systems on a daily basis, and you rely on some of these systems. For instance, your banking. Talk about your phone, and I think one of the panelists here explained, if you lost your phone today, you'll suffer a lot of consequences. Not just for that day. If you don't get it as soon as possible, you might not get some services. So from a personal point of view, make sure that you understand what kind of data you have and what role they play in your daily, let's say, operations. So that said, for instance, your tablet, if that's what you really need to, to make a couple of things work for you. Think about if I was to lose this let's say tablet or phone, what will be the let's say impact in my daily operation? So in that case, talk about data backup, so that in case you've lost a device, basically you can still access your data, because that is the most important thing that these devices kind of have. Then secondly, think about how you access your other online accounts. So basically you have 10, 15, others have 3 or 5 accounts which they can access in one device. And if they're able to, let's say, do this, there's a sense of convenience. But then again, if you don't have access to the device and somebody else access it, then that means somebody else have access to your 10, 20 accounts. It can be social media, your emails, and things of the sort. This can lead to a secondary attack, which the business aspect come into the picture. So you've lost your tablet, you have an attacker who's able to, let's say, write a fake email. Let's say, unfortunately, you're the CEO of company X, and instruct, let's say...
I'm actually the CEO of company X. I'm joking.
So it turns out, it leads to secondary attacks like what we call BC. So this is a business email compromise attacks and so forth. And then the steps that you can take to kind of, reduce the impact of this kind of attacks is making sure that you have two-factor authentication on your accounts. So instead of just relying on passwords, you have other secondary means which you can authenticate on your account. So if a device is lost, you minimize the impact of an attacker taking advantage of this, or whoever has access to that device. So that's basically what we can say from a personal level. So in summary, two-factor authentication, data backup, and making sure you understand the kind of data you have, and minimizing it on this device. So if you don't need the data on the device, you cut it.
On one of the reports that I saw on cybersecurity and cyber threats, there's actually now I see a threat even on the two-factor authentication. What do you think about getting into the space of biometrics and trying to get into more personalized physical protection?
Well, I like that question a lot because recently I just bought what we call UBKs, and guys see me carrying it around.
What is that?
So it's a hardware that use it for two-factor authentication.
Okay.
So we've been relying on, let's say, different channels to access the tokens that we use as a second bit on the authentication process.
Yes.
So for instance, you get an SMS from Google, you want to log into your Gmail account.
Yeah.
Or you get another email that says, this is the code that you have now input and log in. Unfortunately, this is not secure, because if you have a very, let's say, sophisticated attacker in the picture, they can be able to, let's say, get this as the secondary tokens. And going back to what you've just started with, you have a case where let's say like your tablet is lost and somebody has access to your tablet, tries to log into your account, then a token is sent in the same tablet, they copy it and they log in. So what this, let's say, hardware, which, well, going close to biometric as well, it's something that you can carry with you. And when you log into your account, you can physically, like, insert in your laptop, then press on it. So this becomes the kind of second way or trying to authenticate that you're the actual person who holds that account.
I'm going to ask you about those things that always ask me. I am not a robot, and we'll discuss that
No
for a
problem.
second. But Mr. Gangla, thank you very much for coming, and I want to talk about cyber insurance with you, because this is where you sit, the emerging risks. And out of 56,206,097 threats last year, my first question is, which ones of these can you insure? You know, which ones of these threats? Maybe my question is asking, what is cyber insurance today? And what are some of the things that I can transfer that risk to?
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
Cyber insurance basically refers to that insurance which transfers risks from entities to the insurance companies. When we talk about cyber risks, we talk about the risk of organizations being attacked from outside, and when they are attacked, there are certain consequences that they will have to suffer, one of which is loss of money, loss of data, and this data can be harvested and can be sold. Now, if you look at the report that you're talking about, 56 million hacks in 3 months. This was
3 months.
In
That's
3
crazy,
months.
yeah.
Yes, this was a report that was produced by the Kenyan government. Now, if you break it down, that goes to 15 million threats or attacks per month. You can further bring it down to what it means per day, and actually even down to per hour. So essentially what we are saying is that the organizations that we have, everybody, each of the organizations can be attacked. And it is like a threat hovering over each of the organizations. So from an insurance point of view, what I can say is that as insurers, that risk can then be transferred onto us. And it's a real process to transfer it onto us. And one of the things that one needs to do if you want to transfer that risk, First is to look at the cyber hygiene. What John has been talking about. If you want to transfer that risk to an insurance company, it does not mean that the insurance company will step in and take all the risks. What it means is that as a user of IT, one, you have to make sure that your systems are safe. In insurance, there's a cliche that act as if you are not insured. So what we are telling clients or the public is that act as if you're not insured, and if there is any residual risk lingering around, then that would be picked by the insurers. And if you act as if you're not insured, one of the things that would happen is if your risk is being rated, what you'd pay as premium, which is the cost of the transfer, would be lower, so that if you have two people, one person who's taken the pain to go through the process of risk assessment, vulnerability testing in cyber, and making sure that all the necessary, the two-factor authentication are all the necessary protections are there, this person would be rated lower than somebody who has done nothing. You walk into we've had cases where you ask a prospective client whether they've ever had any security assessment. They'll tell you the last time that thing was installed, that is the IT system. In fact, they call it that thing was installed. They've only come here once to service the system. So if you take these two people and you want to rate them from an insurance point of view, even insurers, they look at the risk that they're taking on board. Yes.
Okay. So what are if I could list down, what are some of those risks, what you call residual risks lingering? Once I've done my risk assessment, I've gotten, this is a new term that I've learned, cyber hygiene. Okay, I've learned cyber hygiene, I've had cyber resilience today. So I've done my cyber hygiene, and maybe we can discuss, and I'd say, talk to these guys and figure out what cyber hygiene means for you as an organization or as a person. What are some of those risks that you can actually take on? Are they listed, or is it still a growing space?
Two things. It's a growing space, because as John will tell you, cyber threats are things that are growing on a daily basis. They keep on changing. If you look at the history of cyber threats, initially hackers were guessing passwords. They were guessing, just trying to guess to see if they can be able to access your system. But it's moved to a space where they have automation. So they have machine learning, which can actually predict the kind of password that you put in, and it gets into your system. So the risks that we have, even after the cyber hygiene or resilience has been taken into account, there is still the risk of somebody getting onto your system. It can emanate from within your environment, that is one, or outside. You could be dealing with a third party who does not have any semblance of cybersecurity. Possibly you send an email the other side, then that comes into your system. So those are the residual risks that remain. So those need to be insured.
I'm very tempted to discuss what cannot be insured, and we'll come to that in a second. But Mr. Ombagi, I want to ask you, for business owners, where ransomware is becoming, one of the biggest threats, where there's, malicious malware, where there's all these things that could be attacking you every day, what are some of the compliance functions or strategies that they can, maybe not compliance, but more, we talked compliance with the legal ladies earlier, but what can I do to safeguard from a corporate, from a business perspective?
Well, that's an interesting question, because it cuts across like literally all the problems that we're facing today. So you have a case where if an attacker, let's say, get access to, let's say, your email, that can be able to do, let's say, business email compromise related kind of attacks and things of the sort. And then there's malware cases and so forth and so on. So the strategies that business owners can take is, first of all, doing, awareness internally. It's important for organization to kind of emphasize the role that every employee plays in protecting the bigger goal of the business. And it starts with, user awareness training. That's the first thing we kind of emphasize and help business achieve. Then secondly, you have systems that running your daily operations, and they kind of put out the core functions of, rather suppose the core functions of the business. So basically, what we also kind of emphasize to put in place is monitoring and logging. So monitoring and logging is looking at what kind of outputs do the system produce. And by output, I mean the logs, let's say, they generate regarding the operations. So we can use this information and turn it to sort of like intelligence, where if there's any abnormalities within the systems, you can be able to get alerts. So partly this is where now SOC comes in, where I sit in and do this kind of work on a daily basis. So if there's any abnormalities which deviates from the baseline that we've set, you're able to get an alert. Like today we've seen 4 GB, which we've never seen, of data coming out of your network, or 2 terabytes. Is there somebody maybe extracting data or exfiltrating data from your network? So monitoring and logging is a very key component in protecting today's organization. You have different solutions. You have perimeter controls in place, like firewalls and things of the sort. Then you have what we call EDRs or antiviruses, let's say endpoint protection solutions. Unfortunately, for most organizations, these solutions work in silos, whereas they're supposed to work like a band, well orchestrated. When something passes, or rather bypass the firewall, and it reaches the endpoint, and the endpoint is able to detect this as a malware or something malicious, it should be able to be something that's taken seriously, alerted, let's say, to whoever is in charge of the security, and again update the firewall rules. So this is again something that goes into monitoring. Though there's some challenges with the organization doing this, the guys who are doing it at some point, they're not doing it the right way. So there's a lot of volume of logs, data that's coming from these systems, which can again be turned out to noise instead of intelligence. So being able to filter out and know what kind of data do you want to filter out from these logs, and then what kind of monitoring do you want to put at what strategic points in the organization becomes a very interesting discussion, which again companies need to understand and know. So what usually advise sometimes to clients is if you cannot do this internally, you can always consider outsourcing or build the capacity internally. Talk about building a team that is able to look at this as a changing, let's say, issue. As Gagla said, this is not just something that you do once and you're done. And then lastly, talk about patch management systems, where as this keeps on changing, this system that we've put in place, again, we have security advisories, and security incidents mainly come from having systems which are outdated. Having a patch management system in turn enable you to manage the system that you have, and whatever is outdated within your business environment, you're able to get to know what patch level it's operating on and what steps you need to take to make sure that it's updated.
I even want to know what a patch is, but we'll not talk about that right now.
All right.
But you know then you need to talk to TySOC if you're trying to figure out what your how to mitigate your risk. He's talked about monitoring, making sure that you can be able to identify some of those risks before they come. He's talked about products, some of the products that you can install that can help you manage some of that risk, and of course being able to check how dated or outdated your systems are. I want to go back to Mr. Gangla, and as we come to a closing of this conversation, tell me first, Mr. Gangla, is there great uptake of cyber insurance?
Cyber insurance uptake in Kenya, for instance, the uptake is not very good.
Okay.
That's the reality on the ground, and there are a number of reasons as to why the uptake is not very good. One, lack of knowledge.
Okay.
Just sheer lack of knowledge of the fact that there are solutions out there. That is one. Two, there are a lot of assumptions. A lot of business owners do think that they cannot be attacked. They say that my space is small. Why would somebody attack me? But little is known to them that their space could just be an avenue
to somebody else
who could be a target.
Yeah.
Then expertise, like we have John here. There are not many Johns here who can do what is supposed to be done within the cyberspace. That the lack of capacity from an insurance point of view. By the way, in Kenya, there are only 2 insurance companies that offer cyber insurance. That is AIG and Britam.
Wow.
And all this, from an insurance point of view, if you look at the insurances that are being offered, a lot of it is being taken out of the country. It's not being absorbed within. So that is also lack of capacity and expertise. So those are some of the reasons why the penetration is low.
Uptick. My question to you as a follow-up is, have we had cases where we've started to get claims, locally especially, from cyber insurance?
We have a lot of claims coming through.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
But the problem is that most of these claims are to the financial institutions. And one of the things in the financial institutions is that, for instance, if they are hacked, they would not tell anybody. Because let me ask you, if your bank was hacked and they go around saying we were hacked, the following day everybody will withdraw their money. Yes.
So wait for the following day.
So there's a lot of cyber attack that people are experiencing, and I think it was in the papers. A couple of insurance companies were hacked. I think that was last year, and the increase in hacking incidences is because of things like, for instance, bring your device to work, bring your own device, work from home. When COVID came, a lot of people were not prepared. The security systems were there then, were able to only protect the entities or the institutions within the buildings. But now here comes a situation where all of a sudden everybody has to work from home. So then it meant that the organizations were not prepared, and we have had a lot of incidences. If people were to be honest, and even hospitals, majorly the people who've been attacked are financial institutions, hospitals. We've had manufacturing concerns being attacked. Schools recently, I think it's in the papers, I can talk about it. JQuat. Some students got into the system. They were able to manipulate marks. So a student who might not be doing extremely very well manages to get himself a first class. So thanks to cyber hacking. So it's something that is there, and what I can say is that we need such kind of forums so that the clients, the stakeholders should be educated so that they can then take up the insurances.
As we bring this to a close, Mr. Gangla, what cannot be insured from a cyber risk perspective? What can you not cover? Yet.
That's normally, as a broker, that's one of the most difficult questions to answer. Because when you come out there as a broker, they think that you can be able to cover everything. And when you now come out in the open and say we cannot cover this and that, somebody would wonder, why do we need a broker? However, if you look at cyber incidences, property damage would not be covered. That's straight away. For instance, you have damage to your laptop. There are certain covers that would cover that.
But not a cyber risk.
Not a cyber insurance. So that would not be covered. Although if you look at certain policies, they are very silent. And maybe just to bring you to go back a bit, there are several policies in the market, cyber insurance policies in the market. And for you to be able to get a policy that fits your needs, you should be able to use a broker who knows what they're talking about.
So they're able to retrofit a solution for you based on what your needs are.
Yes, I like giving this example every time I talk to clients and prospects. If you look at a legal system, if, for instance, today I'm caught over speeding on the highway, police will flag me down, ask me, book me, and I'll go to court. Two things that can happen. I like giving examples. I can decide to go to court and represent myself. Or I can decide to get a lawyer to go and represent me. Now, in a case where I decide to go to represent myself before a court, one, I do not know the legal systems. I don't know the language the judge is talking. So chances are that I might not be acquitted. I might be fined. If I get a lawyer, on the other hand, who will talk to me, understand my situation, go to court, then would be able to understand the language of the judge, chances of acquittal are very high. So let me just bring it to what now I'm talking about. I'm sure you now know
I've
what
understood.
I'm talking about.
I've understood where you're going.
For the audience.
Take it home. Take it home.
Let me take it home.
Yeah.
Now, for the audience, what will happen is, I want to put the lawyer in the place of the broker. So the broker will go sit down with the client and understand the needs of this particular client. And in respect to cyber insurance, what we have done, an approach that we are now moving towards, what we are moving towards is to first undertake cyber hygiene. The traditional approach, or what has been happening in this part of the world, is that a proposal form is sent to the client. The client completes a proposal form. Once that has been completed, that forms the basis of which the insurers would then give a quotation. Therein lies a problem. Why? Because the moment you send this proposal form to a client to complete, even if it goes to the finance department or HR department, it will be thrown to the IT.
Yeah.
Now, do you realize what you're asking the IT to do? To tell you the loopholes that he has. So it's like telling the IT person to tell everybody that I cannot do this. So that is also one of the reasons why penetration in cyber insurance is very low.
Okay.
Because IT is not able to do that. So
I'm going to cut you short because we've run out of time.
All right.
But I want you to tell us, how do we reach you to start that cyber hygiene conversation?
Now, I was coming to that. One of the things that we've done, an approach which is very unique, which we've done as Minet.
Yes.
The approach which we've done is to first undertake a cyber hygiene.
Yes.
And for that, we have partnered with experts.
Okay.
So once we've undertaken the cyber hygiene, two things. One, a client would be able to understand where they're sitting from a cyber point of view. Yes. They'll be able to make a decision, an informed decision at that.
Yeah.
Do we transfer this to the insurers? Do we assume this risk? Do we manage this risk? Those are the three areas in insurance. One, do I assume the risk? Can look at it and I'm given a report and I said, fine, I can assume the risk. Two, the risk, I might not be able to assume it. I'll transfer it. And if you transfer it, some of the benefits that go with that, even if you look at Fortune 500 companies, no particular company can assemble the kind of expertise that you'll need to respond to a cyber incident. One, you'll need somebody to do PR, to reach out. For instance, you've been attacked, so you need somebody to do the PR. So no entity has that. You'll need a legal expert. For instance, there's breach of data. Somebody is complaining that my data has been leaked. They want to sue you. You'll need an expert on that. Then you've been held ransom. Somebody is telling you, we need you to pay us so that we encrypt
so
the data.
So you need your financial partners, you need your investigation, crime.
You need to investigate, you need to know.
All these people together.
So all this you'll find under one roof, which you cannot get anywhere. And the benefit of then having all that, one, as an organization, you can be able to invest into IT without fear. It removes the fear. Secondly, there's a benefit to the partners that you deal with. Your partners would be able to entrust you. There's certain instances where, for instance, you find that people would ask you, how is your IT system? Can I be able to do business with you? And thirdly, you'll get a peace of mind. So if you look at everything put together, it's very important for organizations to take on cyber insurance. And for us, we are ready to discuss.
And you must reach John to have that conversation. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. I want you to give your last thoughts in terms of how we protect ourselves and even how people can reach you at TISOC.
All right. So maybe before you jump on that, I could just also have that one small addition on the cyber insurance as well. So you asked a good question, which is what can we not insure? And basically what you'll find most of the people selling the insurance telling you is you cannot insure what you foresee happening. So you can only ensure, or rather you get compensation of what has already occurred. So the 4 primary risks that cyber insurance tries to address. One is the network security and privacy liability. Then we have downtime of your business, let's say network. And then we have what we call media liability, like infringement of an intellectual property. And then lastly, we have errors of omissions, errors and omission actually. So if you have, let's say, a doctor who's gotten, let's say, downtime because of, let's say, of a cyber incident, and they could not attend to their, let's say, their patients, things of the sort, cyber insurance can come and help in this case. And of course, the direct costs that you incur during, let's say, a cyber incident as well, they come in and fit in quite well. And you can also not get cyber insurance for betterment, let's say, of your hardware and things of the sort.
Of course,
So that, I think, also John explained quite well. So in case of a cyber incident and, let's say, you've lost 2 or 3 of your servers, unless it's well articulated and you've got a good broker and can help you pick the right policies, in that case, fits it quite well. Now, coming to the last remarks regarding protecting yourselves and making sure that your business functions as expected, I'll say it starts as, it starts as an internal business organization culture where you want to build a culture where people understand the role they play and they don't look at it as an IT, let's say, department issue. That has been the, the notion that which keeps people failing. So security is, or rather to be specific, IT security, cyber security is not an IT department issue.
And John articulated that very well.
Very well.
You can't just leave it to IT.
Yes, you can leave it to IT. It's an organization issue which people need to understand the role they play. You asked good question during the, the whole conversation. Down there you have guards and they're taking this info. They need to know the role they play in the whole, bigger picture of the system. So
HR has data, legal has data. There's all these different people.
Exactly. So in summary, I'll say putting the right cybersecurity investments is another interesting thing that you need to focus on. So understanding what kind of risks you might have, mapping them out, and then of course being able to identify these are the low-hanging, let's say, fruits for the attackers. Let's start fixing them out. There's a term we use for that, threat modeling. You don't just start randomly fixing your organization and talking about the patch which I mentioned, which is applying the latest updates to your systems and things of the sort. So it's putting the right cybersecurity investment, and then of course understanding at some point you cannot fully do all this by yourself, and maybe your team at some point they lack some of the expertise required. And again, John also explained that quite well. We kind of lack the right capacity to do some of these things. So having business partners who can help you, take you through the journey, and then of course relieve you the pain and the challenges of managing cybersecurity in your organization while you focus on your key core business activities, it's also another interesting thing to take into account. So that's what we offer at TISO services, and not only just products. We look at cybersecurity as a service because it's a dynamic space. Whatever we can offer you today, tomorrow can change. So we take you through the process, and we become your partners, stand by you in case of any incidents, in case of any challenges, and we ride with you through the journey.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Ombagi, and thank you very much, John Gangla. The case of the Johns have given us a bit more hope. I like the things that I've heard. One, I've heard that there are things that you can cover. There are risks that you can transfer to an insurer. And he said, we'll come in, we'll do, John Gangla said, we'll come in, we'll do cyber health assessment for you. We'll help you get better so that we are mitigating only the residual risk that is left. And of course, Mr. Ombagi has told us, listen, here is the threats that you're likely to have. Here are the things that maybe you might not be able to get insurance cover for. But you know what? We can work with you as business partners to do a threat, what is the word? There's a threat mapping. Yeah, threat modeling. Threat modeling.
And we also offer security operations center as a
monitoring
service.
As a service.
And logging.
And logging as a service, so that you're able to understand where you're vulnerable, what you can do about your low-hanging fruits, but also figure out when they're going to attack before they attack. I don't know if you feel like we've had such little time to discuss so much, but I do. and time is really up. I know we've had some of your questions that are coming through. I don't think we will have enough time to answer most of your questions, at least not in this forum directly. And I hope some of the questions that we've raised will be able to answer your questions. But what I can promise you is that one, Minet, for everyone who's registered and who's missed out, will send you a recording of this session today, and so you can be able to refer back. Maybe the question that you have was noted, or if not, it was not answered. Maybe you can get in touch with some of the subject matter experts who have spoken both from legal, from risk, and from being able to provide solutions. Now, I'm going to take a short break, and then after that, we'll come and do some closing remarks. And so I want to ask you just not to go. We're not yet done, but we'll be done in a very short time. Don't go away. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
We had Peter, and we also had Morton, who introduced the topic very well and also gave us insights about how to manage the cyber risks. We have Rose and Rachel, who gave us insights on regulation, the Act, and also from a regulator's point, how they view cyber risk and what they are doing about it, and also informed us quite a bit about our rights, and even the right to have your information deleted once you've disengaged from the particular area that you had visited. And I think lastly, our two Johns, who've been able to give us insights on how we can be able to transfer cyber risks. And maybe to give you comfort is that cyber risks is insurable, it is evolving, and we have to make sure that we do something about the risks that cyber is posing to us in view of a new way of life where we are now working from home. So we want to engage you further in terms of how best you can be able to mitigate the cyber risks and how we can be able to transfer these risks to the insurance companies as we move forward. I also want to thank Amani for the nice moderation he did today. I'm sure we were able to, be glued to the presentation, and he very well brought out the cyber situation as it is in the country and in the globe as we are faced with. And I think lastly is to thank the Minet team, Judith, Esther, and the rest of the team for making this possible for us today. I think with that, asanteni sana. Do have yourself a great day and a great week ahead, and let's continue engaging as we move forward. Thank you.